Hi everyone, welcome to the Drop the ADL teach-in by Jewish Voice for Peace San Diego. Jewish Voice for Peace is one of the largest anti-Zionist organizations in the world and is run by Jewish and non-Jewish volunteers. We are united by our solidarity and co-conspiratorship with the Palestinian freedom struggle and a vision for Jewishness that is both against and beyond the one manufactured by the Zionist nation state of Israel. We want to point out that as we fight together for a free Palestine, which is a struggle intimately connected and intertwined with the land of Palestine, we're also currently occupying the Kumeyaay Nation and their lands, and we must kind of move beyond this acknowledgement of that fact and really see our struggles and the struggles of Palestinians as interconnected, as an interconnected fight for self-determination and sovereignty against other colonialism and imperialism. Thank you to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of San Diego for hosting us, and to the Palestine-Israel Social Justice team of this church for supporting this teach-in. We really appreciate this space and time. And we also want to thank JVP DC for providing a lot of the resources that we will be using today for this presentation. If you'd like to get more involved with JVP SD, hear more about our community events, or just stay informed, please follow us on social media at JVP San Diego and sign up for our newsletters at jvpsandiego.org.
Thank you.
Cool. Sorry, I heard somebody. Also, we have some informational material available both online and on the back table. Yeah, it's still there, right? Cool. So it's for this teach-in. There's a bibliography for this teach-in. We'll also have a QR code at the end to like an online version of it, in case you're like, I don't like paper. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end, so please hold your questions until then. And we'll have the speakers introduce themselves now, just so that we can keep the flow of the presentation going. So I'm Sabina Ali. I'm a PhD candidate, and I study indigeneity and Zionism and kind of claims of indigeneity by Zionists and how they're problematic and things like that. And I'm a JVP member, so these are my colleagues.
Hi, I'm Spencer. I've been with JVP San Diego since January 2024. I've been in leadership since about July 2024.
Hello, I'm Giovanna. I'm also a member of JVP, and I have been with JVP about the same amount of time as Spencer. I too am in leadership. I am a resident here of San Diego, and I work this presentation.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm also a JVP member since about January 2024, like Spencer. And I'm a San Diego local here, and also a PhD student in history.
All right. Okay. So in our teach-in today, we're going to talk about the ADL stance and history of repressing progressive movements. We're going to discuss some experiences that certain individuals and organizations have had in their interactions with the ADL. And then we're going to brainstorm some ways to take action and build coalitions, and how we can share the information that we learned today with our families and communities. Cool. So the ADL is the Anti Defamation League. Just a brief overview of what it is if you're unfamiliar. It's a US-based organization founded in 1913 with the original mission of combating anti-Semitism and defending civil rights for Jewish people. But then over time, the ADL claims to kind of have broadened their focus to address various forms of hate, extremism, and bigotry, both online and offline, and to protect the civil rights of all marginalized people. The ADL maintains about 26 regional offices across the US, including one in San Diego, and also has an office in Jerusalem as a way to kind of emphasize their global reach. So the ADL claims to be, quote, the leading anti-hate organization in the world, and often asserts that it represents all Jewish people in fighting anti-Semitism and advocating for Jewish rights. The organization claims that it proudly supports Jewish self-determination in the form of the nation-state of Israel. This is the basic kind of foundational definition of Zionism. The ADL, quote, believes that the existence of Israel provides Jews with a safe haven from the bigotry and endangerment they have suffered perennially as a minority culture among non-Jewish majority cultures, unquote. However, this commitment to Zionism, right, this idea and practice that Jewish safety and self-determination must come in the form of a nation state, fails to not only account for the diversity of Jewish people and Jewish histories, but also the reality of Zionism in practice on the ground, which is a colonial and racist ideology that manifests in the systemic displacement and dispossession of Palestinians from their lands, well-documented conditions of apartheid and military occupation, and state-sponsored ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians. The ADL's unwavering support of the nation-state of Israel not only distorts these realities and erases Jewish diversity, especially a long history of Jewish anti-Zionism, it also often intersects with ADL's collaboration with law enforcement. So for example, the ADL has operated in San Diego since the 1980s. Regional offices like the one here play an important role in showing this relationship that the ADL has built with law enforcement locally, nationally, and internationally. The ADL trains thousands of US law enforcement officers each year, and the regional offices work very closely with local police departments, FBI field offices, and Homeland Security officials. So these partnerships are very concerning, as the ADL is helping to legitimize and support agencies that have long histories of racial profiling, brutality, and abuse, so particularly against Black American, Latinx, and Indigenous communities. So the ADL, as we can see and we'll see more of soon, is caught in this inherent conflict of claiming to fight hate and support civil rights, while at the same time supporting, funding, and partnering with institutions that perpetuate systemic violence and oppression. This will be discussed more by my colleagues, who will talk more about the ADL's ties with the police, as well as their surveillance and targeting of particular activists and activist groups. But before that, let's just take a quick, close look at some of the political actions of the ADL leadership, which have raised questions about their commitment to civil rights for all communities. One example, a very popular example that draws attention, is Sir Jonathan Greenblatt. He's the ADL's CEO, and his kind of constant support of right-wing figures. After the 2024 election victory of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, Greenblatt wasted no time kind of congratulating these right-wing authoritarians. He stated that he looked forward to working with the Trump administration to, quote, stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all, unquote. Despite Trump's clear history of bigotry and authoritarianism that we are seeing every single day. This obviously raised alarms, particularly as many civil rights activists correctly view Trump as a figure who has emboldened the existing structures of white supremacy and making Greenblatt's support of him seem really at odds with the ADL's stated mission, which I mentioned in the beginning, right, to fight hate and extremism. Another like super popular example, this controversial moment, right, where Elon Musk, during the Trump's inauguration, Musk, this billionaire, famous man, performed a Nazi salute during his speech. Of course, he later denied it. He said, like, oh, I was just throwing my heart to the audience. Okay. When it came to kind of holding Musk accountable, the ADL, instead of condemning his actions, right, at the very least, called on, quote, all sides to give one another a bit of grace. So this is particularly striking considering the ADL's mission to combat anti-Semitism and stop hate speech. This is a very interesting take from an organization claiming to fight the defamation of Jewish people particularly. And then the last example I'll share before I pass it on to my colleague is the ADL's response to the abduction and detainment of Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian activist and Columbia University student who, mashallah, is now released. But their response to this, to him being abducted and detained, kind of further exemplifies this organization's disturbing complicity in state-sanctioned oppression rather than a commitment to civil rights. So after Khalil was detained under Trump's executive orders, the ADL failed to speak out against the abusive tactics of the administration. Department of Homeland Security spokesman confirmed that Khalil's detention was in fact part of Trump's executive orders, which were framed as efforts to combat anti-Semitism, right? Instead of the actual like targeted repression of pro-Palestinian activism that it was. And despite all this, the ADL refused to challenge the Gestapo-style abductions happening under Trump's presidency. So if the ADL truly acted in the interests of civil rights, as they claim to, right, as they were historically founded on, they should have not been complicit in the detainment and abduction of legal U.S. residents like Khalil, especially given that he had committed no crime. And I will not go on a rant, as I would really like to, about ICE abductions in general in this country. And I'll pass it on to my colleague, Giovanna. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina. So as Sabina explained, it is well beyond time to reject and condemn the ADL because, as we will show, and as Sabina mentioned previously, it is not what it purports to be. If terrorism in its broadest sense refers to the use or threat of violence against civilians to achieve political or ideological ends, then the ADL is a terrorist supporting organization, as the historical evidence we will provide in the following slides will prove. The ADL is not only a reliable source, for news and research on extremism. It actually conducts disinformation campaigns about US anti-Semitism, Israeli colonialism, and its own organizational aims. So for those not familiar with Truth Out, it is an American nonprofit organization founded in 2021, and Truth Out works to spark action by revealing systemic social, racial, and economic, as well as environmental injustice, and providing a platform for progressive and transformative ideas through in-depth investigative reporting and critical analysis. So here you have pictured two articles from Plus 972 and The Nation, and they're both from 2022. For sake of knowledge, plus 972 is an Israeli left-wing publication. The Nation, on the other hand, has a long history of thoughtful reporting on Palestine. And, as you may have recognized, the person pictured here is, on the right, is Jonathan Greenblatt, under the header of the Nation. The ADL's national director and CEO, and I would say gaslighter in chief. The ADL has always served the interests of Israel and the American security apparatus, but it has gotten more pugnacious under Greenblatt's tenure as they target American progressive organizations more publicly, which is why we chose the image for the flyer for this event, because it underscores the inherent contradictions in the stated goals and the actual actions of the ADL. As Sabina pointed out, and as some of you might recall, moments after Trump was inaugurated, Elon Musk performed back-to-back Nazi salutes on stage. So not once, but twice. In response to his Sig Heils, Greenblatt shockingly said it was just, quote, an awkward gesture and asked people to give him the benefit of the doubt. In the ultimate effort to gaslight us all and tell us not to believe our eyes, he said he didn't think it was intended to be a fascist salute. But we all know what we saw. Furthermore, Stephen Ludwig, the ADL's regional board member in Philadelphia, resigned his 30-year-long membership in June of this year as a protest over the organization's approach to anti-Semitism and civil rights. In a very strongly worded letter of resignation, he stated, quote, "The ADL has failed to stand up against the spread of hatred, the erosion of the rule of law, and the threat of authoritarianism." In this letter, which he shared with The Forward, an award-winning Jewish American nonprofit publication focusing on issues relevant to the Jewish community and beyond, he said that, quote, "The focus seems to have been abandoned and there seems to have been a decision made to ally the organization with a very misguided use of anti-Semitism as cover to implement authoritarianism." So the worst of the ADL's tactics is something we're going to talk about. And why are we talking about it? The ADL is not only dishonest about its true motivations, but a bad actor that has infiltrated many sectors of American society. Some highlights of its worst practices include surveillance, infiltration, and spying, US police exchanges and trainings, harmful advocacy, and educational infiltration into the national education system from kindergarten through 12th grade. And those topics will be covered in the next few slides. So surveillance, a little note here, surveillance, infiltration, and spying is about intent to harm, and the ADL has never had good intentions towards our communities. So you can basically say that the ADL is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Many of you may be familiar with SNCC, the Student National Coordinating Committee, formerly the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was the principal channel of student commitment in the US to the civil rights movement in the 1960s. In 1967, they published an article in the upper image on the slide in its newsletter that accurately describes Zionism as a colonial movement premised on white supremacy. The article explained that the Zionist project, quote, received maximum help, support, and encouragement from Great Britain, the United States, and other white Western colonial movements. They also note that this support made it possible for colonizers to take over lands and homes of non-Jewish Palestinians through, quote, terror force and massacres, wiping out Palestinian villages in order to create Israel. In the Jewish Telegraphic Agency Bulletin, pictured here in the lower image, the ADL called SNCC an extremist organization, accusing it of anti-Semitism and comparing it to the KKK. The ADL considers SNCC support for the Palestinian struggle to be a, quote, tragedy in the race relations, adding that SNCC is no longer a responsible civil rights group. It ties itself to Chinese, Soviet, and now Arab propaganda machines in the United States. Americans generally reject this kind of extremism, whether it comes from a group like SNCC or one like the Ku Klux Klan. So, the ADL has been conflating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism for over half a century now. With regards to defamation, surveillance, infiltration, and spying, the ADL does not hide its investigations, which have been proven to be surveillance, infiltration, and actual spying. This letter pictured here is from July 7th, 1961. It's written by the ADL National Director, Benjamin Epstein, and explains the goals of these espionage operations. The ADL used its connections on college campuses to engage in such surveillance. And in many ways, it was a precursor to what many of us now know as Canary Mission. Hatch, an assistant director of intelligence with ICE's Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, which is dedicated to dismantling transnational criminal organizations, testified within the last couple weeks in Massachusetts District Court that his team had compiled 100 reports based on a list of 5,000 people, most of whom came from Canary Mission's doxing campaigns. Trump's targeting of pro-Palestine voices has led to arrests and efforts to deport university faculty members and foreign-born students, including Mahmoud Khalil. We could do a whole teach-in on just this topic, but we'll leave that for another day. Next are some specific examples of why the ADL should be condemned for the terror-supporting organization that they are. Pictured here, you have a Palestinian-American martyr, Alex Ode, who was assassinated with the complicity of the ADL. So Alex, the ADL spied on Alex Ode in California, and he was a Palestinian who served as the West Coast Regional Director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, ADC. Ode was martyred on October 11, 1985, when his Los Angeles office was bombed by pro-Israel activists, after which investigators found a key and the floor plan to Ode's office in the files which the ADL hired spy Roy Bullock had compiled on Ode. Bullock had infiltrated the ADC and helped the ADL frame the group as, quote, anti-Semites. Jeffrey Blankford, an activist who has himself also has also been spied on by the ADL, reported that Bullock became a member of a local ADC chapter and as a former weightlifter was tasked with handling the ADC security. As Blankford wrote, Bullock obtained pamphlets from the ADC that he then planted at the convention of the Holocaust-denying Journal of Historical Review, quote unquote, in order to frame the ADC for working with anti-Semites. And so here, I would like to take a moment to elevate ADC's yearly memorial gala to celebrate Alex Ode's life and honor his achievements. And this year will be held on October 11th in Anaheim and will feature notable and inspiring guest speakers. If any of you are interested in attending, you can find more information about it on ADC's website or by contacting the organization directly. Another individual, Chris Hani, pictured here, was another victim of the ADL, and the ADL spied on him, and he was a prominent Black South African activist who was assassinated in South Africa on April 10th, 1993, shortly after a speaking tour here in California. While on tour, Hani was followed by one of the ADL hired police officers who prepared a lengthy report on Hani for the South African apartheid government. Israel, of course, had long supported and armed South Africa's apartheid regime, and with the ADL's help to eliminate the solidarity between the Palestinian and South African liberation struggles being their aim. The ADL and Israel understood that such solidarity could increase the use of shared tactics such as boycotts and divestment campaigns against both regimes. Publicly, the ADL presented to be critical of South Africa's apartheid while downplaying Israel's alliance with the regime, and later lobbied for post-apartheid South African politicians to support Israel. It is notable that Israel itself practices apartheid within its borders. The wide scope of the ADL's operations became clear in the 90s when the ADL was forced to settle in a lawsuit following revelations that it had worked with the police in California to spy on social justice organizations and individuals. And so here you have a list of other organizations that have been targeted by the ADL. The ADL's network of spies secretly collected information on more than 14,000 individuals and more than 950 American religious, labor, peace, and human rights groups. Their targets included the NAACP, the Rainbow Coalition, the ACLU, ACT UP, the American Indian Movement, Greenpeace, the Northern California Ecumenical Council, United Farm Workers, reporters from the LA Times, and KQED Public Television, as well as at least 8 Jewish peace groups and an assortment of pro-Palestinian organizations. A key target has been and remains the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, ADC, of which, as mentioned previously, Alex Ode was a member. And here you have a list of the top 10 anti-Israel groups in the US according to the ADL. And this list is from 2013. This list has actually been scrubbed from the ADL's website, was previously published there, as have other pages, but these lists can always be found in the Internet Archive as well as in the 2013 article in the Times of Israel. The ADL itself has identified its own enemies. As you can see, these include such notables as Code Pink, us, JVP, Nature Karta, and for those of you not familiar with Nature Karta, they are the Haredi Jewish anti-Zionist organization you often see at protests, where the men wear the traditional attire of the long black robes, the hats, long beards, and payas or sidewalks, as well as the Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP. So, in conclusion, the defamation, surveillance, infiltration, and spying continues today. Following the violent white supremacist rally in Charlottesville in 2017, activists documented how the ADL advised police to plant undercover agents to get surveillance footage against anti-racist protesters. As you can see in the left image from one of JVP's Instagram posts. In July, an article in The Guardian revealed that during the height of the movement for Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, the so-called civil rights organization, the ADL, spied on black organizers. So as much as they purport to be fighting discrimination and hate speech, they themselves engaged in some of the most vile tactics. And now I will pass it on to Spencer.
Thank you, Giovanna. Again, my name's Spencer, and I will be covering the Deadly Exchange, which was an exchange program of police between Israel and the United States from 2002 to about 2021. The ADL continues to present itself as an institution, quote unquote, opposing hate, but its record of sponsoring trips for US FBI agents, police, ICE agents, and Border Patrol really says otherwise. All of these organizations were sent to Israel for meetings and trainings with Israeli armed forces until just a few years ago. One of the most dangerous places where state violence in the US and Israel converged is in these exchange programs. Worst practices were shared to promote and extend discriminatory and repressive policing in both countries. These can include unconstitutional racial profiling, massive spying and surveillance, deportation and detention, and attacks on human rights defenders. The issue of normalization is about which countries legitimize Israel's continued genocide of the Palestinians by recognizing Israel as a state. Another layer is when US cops and ICE train with state security organizations with long-term documented uses of torture, thus legitimizing their tactics. In police exchanges with the US, our cops and Border Patrol agents learn techniques like surveillance, torture, and preventative detention. These are just regular parts of the job. Their main collaborators are Shin Bet, which was formerly the Haganah militia, who acted as Israel's security agency, and Yassam, a paramilitary group that recruits from the army specializing in counterterrorism and riot control. In this piece by Mondo Weiss in 2021, many examples are covered of why we don't want the police and ICE training with the Israeli army or Shin Bet. From Israel's inception in 1948, a leader within the Haganah was specifically in charge of destroying Arab villages. And this type of brutal policy was possible because the first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, chose to continue a form of martial law imposed by the British before Israel's inception. The policy gave an irregular amount of power relating to detention, surveillance, and civil rights. Shin Bet officers are shrouded in secrecy and have little to no oversight. It was only revealed that the officers were even using torture during interrogation in 1986 when Shin Bet lied to the public about killing 4 Palestinian bus hijackers who were attempting to demand the release of 500 Palestinian prisoners. 2 of the Palestinian men were later revealed to have died during interrogation, which led to mass public outrage in Israel. Another torture case in the 1980s revealed a practice of insulting, beating, sleep deprivation, and freezing that still takes place in Israel today. In this 2019 report from Amnesty International, which I've also been a member of for many years, torture tactics were used on a young man named Samir Arbid, who was arrested on suspicion of involvement of a murder because a judicial body authorized Shin Bet to perform torture on Samir. He was subjected to beating until he was unable to eat unassisted. Later he was beaten unconscious and then transferred to a hospital for treatment on his broken ribs, where he had to be put on a respirator. All of this fell under the legal framework of something called the ticking time bomb scenario. If Shin Bet makes an argument of imminent threat, a judicial body will authorize almost any form of torture. In this 2008 report from Israel National News, an Israeli news outlet that identifies with religious Zionism, they detail the indictment of Mordechai Mehager. Mehager, along with other Yassam officers, felt the need to club and bloody over 200 peaceful activists, including minors and 2 Knesset members. During an unauthorized protest, this all took place. Mehager left 1 man with permanent disabilities after clubbing him over the head for 2 minutes. ADL, we know that ADL stopped organizing and funding police exchanges in about 2021 due to JVP's diligent use of the FOIA request and some of the ADL's own documentation. JVP National's Deadly Exchange campaign was started as a group of multiracial Jews and allies who have been working to end US-Israel law enforcement exchange programs and made a commitment to bring all of their support to Black liberation during the Ferguson BLM protest. As we shift to a society that demonizes immigrants, we must remember that many of the tactics learned in exchange programs from 2002 to 2021 are in current use by ICE. They're in use by Border Patrol, they're in use by police departments and the FBI. In this time period, thousands of officers were trained. Were trained with technology deals, and a lot of those technology deals were implemented in San Diego. Our new Israeli smart camera system was implemented during Comic-Con of last year and during Pride of last year. They're still in current use today. From this report from Alternet, which is also confirmed on ADL's own website, quote from, since 2002, the Anti Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee Project Interchange, and the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs have sent police chiefs, assistant chiefs, and captains on fully paid trips to Israel and the Palestinian territories to observe the operations of the Israeli National Police. Also observed the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli Border Patrol, and the country's intelligence services. Tax documents from the Jewish Institute shows the organization spent $36,857 on the trips in 2012. The slide goes over non-lethals, which that phrase has been a little demonized this year. We're now using the term less lethal because a lot of these technologies can still kill you. If a rubber bullet or a tear gas canister hits you in the eye, it can become a lethal weapon. There are credible reports that crowd control technologies, including some classified as non-lethal, less lethal, have been tested on Palestinians and subsequently deployed in the United States. Examples include active denial systems, or ADS, which is a directed energy weapon. This has been deployed in various settings, including border control and crowd control situations. This directed energy weapon, it causes headaches. Some people have claimed internal bleeding and kind of like a ringing in the ears and disorientation. American tear gas has been exported to injure and kill Palestinians, while Israeli skunk spray made its appearance inside the student encampments last year. Many were designed to cause, many were surprised to learn that skunk was not in fact a stink bomb, but instead a chemical weapon designed to cause severe illness requiring hospitalization. Skunk is used both on Palestinians by the IDF and American Border Patrol and correctional facilities. For this reporting from Team Ebony in 2014, quote, the April 2011 National Counterterrorism Seminar, or NCTS, was sponsored by the Anti Defamation League. It brought together leaders from the largest American police departments, the FBI and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, with members of the Israeli National Police, Israel Defense Forces, and other intelligence organizations. Over 9,000 American officials have trained with the Israeli police and military unions on responding to civilian protest and quote-unquote terrorism. These operations reflect failure to distinguish between the apparent duty of police to protect civilians and military responses to war. This fusion has led to, this fusion had life-costing implications for Americans, specifically Black, Muslim, and Arab people. By glorifying the practices of Israel's armed forces, including racial profiling, extrajudicial killings, and violent suppression of grassroots protests, and feeding Islamophobic narratives on who commits violence, ADL's NCTS program does not create safety. It perpetuates harm against communities that are already bearing the brunt of racialized violence. Tammy Gillies, the regional director of ADL in San Diego, personally coordinated law enforcement training trips to Israel between 2010 and 2020. All the trips have reportedly stopped this relationship, but this relationship will have ripple effects for years to come. Please take note that the officers pictured are part of the Palestinian Authority who also took part in the deadly exchange. These officers are regularly described by Palestinians in the West Bank as puppets of the Israeli government. Here we have Chief Walt Vasquez, now retired, but they were in La Mesa PD. Thanks to SDPD officers like Vasquez, who took special interest in Palestinian crowd control and the camera network that covers Jerusalem, the surveillance state is alive and well from San Diego to Palestine. Without going to one of these trips, he would never, maybe not be aware of this technology, but he would not see it in action and be as fervent about implementing this kind of technology in San Diego. It's clear that our police have extensively trained in Israel and brought back tactics that they can implement to suppress large people-powered movements like BLM, the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, and even protesting ICE. Police violence and surveillance may be the ADL's largest import and export by numbers. We're all connected through our oppression, whether it's the grappling knee hold that killed George Floyd, or the similar kind of anti-genocide protests that happen daily here and in Palestine. And we really must just work together to hope for a different outcome in this country and around the world. And with that, I will pass this on to Rachel.
So my name is Rachel, and thank you again to my three awesome friends and colleagues here with JVP who did such an awesome job. So I will, I guess, be wrapping up the presentation today, but before that, I guess I have a lot to talk about in terms of especially the ADL in schools. And then before we conclude, we will get on to some good news. So. Yeah, so let's talk about doxing and attacking individuals, including educators and students. There are different examples of the ADL doing this, sometimes really direct, calling out teachers. For example, so here's a great example here. So after 2 high school students in Philadelphia made a podcast comparing the art of Palestinians with the art of enslaved people, it was selected by their teacher and vetted by their principal to be played at the school's week of Black History Month assemblies. Another teacher at the first assembly claimed the podcast was anti-Semitic and forwarded it to a local pro-Israel organization. The organization led a campaign that successfully pressured this school district to remove the podcast from the remaining assemblies. Although the podcast did not mention Jews or Zionism, the ADL nonetheless partners with the local pro-Israel group to pressure the school district to investigate the student's teacher, Keziah Ridgway, an award-winning anti-racist educator. Like I said, the ADL does do this a little more directly. Other times they do this a little more discreetly, a little more passive-aggressively, you might say. But there's a great educator here named Dr. Nora Lester Murad, and I'll just read this quote for any of you in the back. I know I can read this without my glasses. So she says, in schools, the ADL works with partners to bully educators and students directly by disparaging the reputations, calling for disciplinary action against them, and submitting formal complaints that subject the schools, educators, and students to invasive and exhausting investigations. To protect Israel, the ADL deceptively mixes legitimate calls against anti-Semitism with politicized calls to censor Palestinians and their supporters. For example, for years, the ADL has played a lead role in the right-wing opposition to liberated ethnic studies. This is a massive issue because I mean, I am actually not personally Jewish, but as like a lot of my Jewish friends, my Jewish partner would tell you, anti-Semitism is absolutely on the rise. And this is an issue that we all need to be taking massively seriously. I mean, we talked about Elon Musk and just blatantly using the Nazi symbol. I mean, so this is a time where we really need legitimate organizations in our school and not those that are just trying to censor very legitimate critiques of the state of Israel. And conflating those creates a big issue, especially with the data that the ADL produces. Because while anti-Semitism is on the rise, I'll go into some examples for what the ADL defines as anti-Semitism in our universities later. So, some of this advocacy, how does this happen? So there's a specific definition called the IHRA definition that stands for the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, who adopted a working definition of anti-Semitism that lists 11 examples, 7 of which are related to Israel. And so this definition essentially, I mean, we could go into all of their examples, but it denies the Jewish people the right to their self-determination by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. So that's one of the quotes that this definition says. So they believe that if you say that this state of Israel is a racist endeavor, that is a definition of anti-Semitism, right? So these are legitimate critiques of racism, and also, I don't know if all of you got that little pamphlet, but you can open it up to the page where there's a UN resolution on Zionism as racism, that's the title, where a UN resolution that went through and passed declares Zionism as racism. And there's a great passage on that right in the middle there. So this is a legitimate critique. It is a critique that has been passed and named by the UN General Assembly. However, this, under the IHRA definition, is classified as anti-Semitism because, again, like in this quote, they say that this is a denial of self-determination for Jewish people by claiming that the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. And that's just one of those 7 examples out of the 11. So they also do this through anti-BDS legislation. Does everyone know what BDS is, or any like first-timers hearing up? Okay, so we know the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. The ADL is in blatant opposition. Pretty much, there are actually like a little stipulation here. The current director of the ADL has taken contradictory stances on anti-BDS legislation. So anyways, there are discrepancies. However, the organization as a whole has published some materials calling this like, I think they call BDS like a racist, anti-Semitic movement. The ADL, I'll read this quote here. They specifically say, quote, the BDS movement uses divisive and inaccurate terms like apartheid, genocide, settler colonialism, and supremacists to refer to aspects of Israeli action or policy. They criticize language which serves to demonize the Jewish state and those who support its existence. So again, really important quote from the ADL there, just showing how like they're really censoring free speech here. And this is also like, for those of you who don't know too much about BDS, this is a movement with historical roots in the South African anti-apartheid movement. It's also not of opinion that Palestine is an apartheid state. Like, that is a fact. I worked for the United Nations. This is a fact, right? The UN knows this, Amnesty International knows this, all the human rights organizations know this. But so the ADL being so present on our campuses really creates this culture where students absorb these definitions, like the IHRA definitions, right? And so, for example, when I went to San Diego State, gosh, so many years ago now, I was walking on campus, and one day I saw a poster of myself, and I'll have the rest of the names marked up, but that's me right there, BDS and us JP activists. Then this is not, as a disclaimer, put out by the ADL, right? This is actually put out by a designated hate group, the Horowitz Freedom Center, run by David Horowitz, who's like a documented Islamophobe. You can go to Southern Poverty Law Center and read all about that. But anyways, so David Horowitz worked with whoever to put these flyers all over our campus. But you have groups like the ADL and other groups, even the Hillel on our campus, unfortunately at that time, sort of sided with this narrative that us as students, being BDS activists, were anti-Semitic. And the university took that side and they allowed these posters to stay up, and they also invited the David Horowitz to speak on campus. And so I'll read you this too, because this is really funny. The BDS, they call it a Hamas-inspired genocidal campaign to destroy Israel, the world's only Jewish state. This is what they said about us. The following students and faculty at SDSU have allied themselves with Palestinian terrorists to perpetrate BDS and Jew hatred on this campus. Sorry, it's kind of funny. As an FYI, so there's like 6 other students. I keep up with 4 of them. They all have doctorates. One's a medical doctor, works with Doctors Without Borders. 3 of them have Juris Doctorates of Law. One of them went to Chicago Law School, was the valedictorian there. The valedictorian at SDSU does humanitarian law projects. These are students who have taken their education and done incredible things. And unfortunately, these are the types of students that the ADL and other organizations really seek to dox and prosecute and tear down, because those are the students whose careers they want to decimate, unfortunately. So yeah, this is like what this culture creates on university campuses, and it's really procured and supported by the ADL. So, oh my gosh, I love this example here. So the ADL, outside of our universities, obviously also works with K through 12. Actually, self-reported on the ADL's website, the impact of one of their programs, the biggest one called No Place for Hate, which, I mean, I went to San Diego Public Schools, I did the No Place for Hate program, has impacted 1.8 million students, 190,000 educators, and over 2,000 schools. So that's a lot. I'll read you one of the poems from an ADL presentation. I don't know if it's under the No Place for Hate, but anyways, it's under their educational resources for K through 12. Part of this poem reads, sorry. One nation, a Jewish nation, building a foundation with self-determination to grow stronger, stronger than we were the day before and stronger than our ancestors in the desert could have ever imagined. Here's the key part. We are a blank canvas, and each journey is a colorful marker. And so these poems really paint this picture of the blank canvas of Palestine, right? So even though some of these things, they seem like a harmless poem, and you know, all groups deserve self-determination and to feel like they aren't, you know, prosecuted and implicated by horrific things like anti-Semitism, there is also a narrative that's woven into all of these things. And as a question, so 1914, right, World War I, how many people are in Palestine? Population, any guesses? This blank canvas, this blank slate, right? Because Israel was a country without a people, for a people without a country, right? So how many people were here, right? Any guesses? 50,000? Yeah, guess. 2 million? Okay. Well, okay, so Palestine's really small. It did get there pretty quickly, but at 1914, there's 800,000 people. This is, for this very small region, pretty densely populated. So this narrative about there's no people here is really, I mean, it's step 10 of the 10 stages of denial, or the 10 stages of genocide. The 10th stage is denial, right? That's a big part of it. We've seen this. I mean, I have a like degrees focused on violence, and so this is what I study. And it's constant, the denial is constant. We've seen this in Turkey with the Armenian genocide, right? We see this now with the genocide of Palestine, continuous denial. Unfortunately, this is a part of it. There was denial in the Rwandan genocide, even though 800,000 people died in 90 days. There was denial then, right? So when do we say we're not going to deny this is happening anymore? And so unfortunately, like, we need to make sure that our kids are not subjected to narratives that are ahistorical, right? I might be biased as a doctoral student of history, but we really need to make sure that the narratives that we're giving them are critical and they're really like rooted in deep and like thoughtful reflection of what actually happened in history, and not the white ivory tower whitewash narrative.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really good summary slide of the ADL in schools and how they are dangerous. I'll read some of these great bullet points. So first one, yes, they base their curriculum on unreliable, manipulated, and even false data to incite fear and promote hate. Again, these are like how they conflate, they call pro-Palestinian speech anti-Semitism, and that gets into the data, right? They use anti-hate rhetoric while promoting anti-Palestine, anti-Muslim, anti-Arab bias and hate. They center cops in their educational material as reliable members of the community, the same cops that can be seen working with ICE to carry out extrajudicial kidnappings against international law, right? So they also conflate anti-Semitism with legal free speech for Palestinian rights and criticisms of Israel and Zionism, weaponizing Title IX of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And they censor students and educators who oppose racism in all forms. And many of these school districts, including San Diego Unified, have adopted ADL curriculums, have adopted the IHRA definition, and they utilize these things actively in their curriculum development. However, we will get into some good news about a teachers union. Maybe some of you have heard that one, who recently, dropped the ADL. But anyways, I'll also mention some of the ways that ADL actually works in universities further. So they have the Masa Israel Journey, which is a leading provider of immersive travel experiences, which offers this fellowship program to young students. They get to go to Jerusalem and they get to train with the ADL on, for example, they're supposed to come back to universities and be these leaders against anti-Semitism, right? But again, they're being trained on these narratives, and they're being trained within the apartheid state, which aims and makes a lot of money off of progressing that narrative. They also have, for example, the Glass Leadership Institute. This is a nationally recognized leadership development program. Anyways, this is what the ADL says about it. But this is another one. And for example, participants gain firsthand exposure to ADL's work, including monitoring, tracking, and combating hate groups, terrorism, and extremism, as well as law enforcement training, resources, and support. And the ADL invests $2,500 into each participant. So they get paid to do this type of training, and specifically with that very problematic partnership with law enforcement and viewing terrorism in this very whitewashed, politicized lens, rather than the great definition that my colleagues presented earlier. So the ADL really works with partners to bully educators, students, and schools by these three very specific ways. And actually, I'll read this. This is great. I do have some examples here of the ADL's report cards. They give our universities report cards. I don't know if you all have seen these. So, for example, these are some of the things that they have called anti-Semitism on San Diego State University's campus. An SJP-led group of anti-Israel protesters organized a walkout to call for SDSU to divest. Anti-Semitic. The University of California, San Diego, UCSD, they received a C report card. Actually, SDSU got a little bit better grade of a B. But so some of the anti-Semitic report card things that are reported on here are SJP labeled Israel an apartheid state. There were multiple rallies from anti-Zionists. And they were commending the university response to the Gaza Solidarity encampment, clapping for the arrest of 60 protesters, including 40 students and faculty. That was their, happy about the responsive action there. That just gives you some examples of how, again, these are free speech protests that the ADL is classifying as these pro-terror protests and contributing to bad grades of anti-Semitic universities, right? When again, we should be taking these very seriously. Another way they do this is specifically through criminalizing Students for Justice in Palestine. This is an ADL article that I'll read you the title. It says, Students for Justice in Palestine endorses terrorism and dismantling Zionism. They say that SJP has, quote, explicitly endorsed the actions of Hamas in their armed attacks on Israeli civilians. And, right, we're not saying that every single person in a massive national organization, which includes thousands of students, that everyone is perfect. However, this is a very odd and politicized way of framing another UN resolution, which as a former UN consultant, I really love reading these. Here's UN Resolution 2649, published in 1970, so a little old, yeah. Quote, calls upon all states to implement fully and faithfully the resolutions of the United Nations regarding the exercise of the right to self-determination and independence by peoples under colonial and foreign domination. 2, reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggles of people for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial and foreign domination and foreign occupation by all available means, including armed struggle. Which means that under international law, Hamas is in their full right to resist colonialism. That's international law, right? Israel, however, is going against international law by bombing a population within their jurisdiction and occupation. So the argument here by SJP, right, and by a lot of these students who read this resolution is that one is going against international law, the other is codified. Now 3, this point is fun, reaffirms the inalienable right of the Namibian peoples, the Palestinian people, and all peoples under foreign and colonial domination of self-determination, national independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and sovereignty without outside interference. So again, that's the argument here, but the ADL construes it as anti-Semitism and illegitimate when it's a UN resolution. So yeah, this is just to recap. We've talked about, and this is something that was actually said by one of the teachers from, it is the NEA, the National Education Association, who said, quote, the Anti Defamation League is not the social justice partner it claims to be. And that is why we do have some good news. One of those good news mentioned, not on this slide, is that the National Education Association, the US's largest teachers union, a couple days ago, passed a resolution that says, quote, they will not use, endorse, or publicize any materials from the ADL.
Okay.
But also here, and this is a big win that we can also thank some of these awesome other campaigns that have been doing the work. Campaigns like Deadly Exchange, the major Drop the ADL, there's also the Drop the ADL from Schools, a specific website. So definitely go home, check those out. There's tons of resources, there's historical information. Lots of links there to different articles where you can, really go read more about the history that we've just kind of summarized here. So we also, more good news. So the ADL leaders have internally debated ending their police delegations to Israel. So at least there's some like internal change there. The Jewish Currents article reads that an internal ADL memo, again, like recommended completely ending those police delegations. This is just two of the same articles, but we don't have confirmation on this. I couldn't find anything. I really tried hard, just that there's like internal speculation. But in terms of like San Diego delegations going, there hasn't been like anything documented for at least a few years. So who knows if it's happening or not, but it possibly could have stopped.
What's the date on these stories?
Those ones, 2022.
Okay. So kind of a while ago then. Okay. 2 years.
Yeah, like I said, there hasn't been too much updates like on their delegations since then. Oh yeah, this is a good one. Wikipedia declared the ADL an unreliable source. And I'm a private tutor for all my students, so this one's just extra funny that Wikipedia is now declaring people unreliable. And this is a fun text to read. I'll read it again for anyone in the back who can't read it. Quote, Wikipedia has declared the Anti Defamation League a generally unreliable source on the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And this label puts the ADL in the same category as Fox News and Amazon reviews, among other unreliable sources. So now that we've pretty much concluded our presentation today, we do have some questions for you all to really like get some discussion going and to make some friends in this world is so isolated. So let's try to talk to each other here, get to know your neighbor, have some fun after this, and yeah, so we can discuss these questions about like one, are there any direct ways that you have been impacted by the ADL's racist work? Or maybe you didn't know it was racist. Like I said, I was all geared up for a no hate campaign through public schools. But the other question that we have here are what are examples of the tactics that we just discussed that are being used right here in California? And this is also one for anyone who's like observed things, because again, there's a lack of information on exactly how this is operationalized on the ground, right? So we'd love to know if anyone has worked with the ADL, like a teacher, have you trained with them? What are some examples like of not just the ADL tactics, but other organizations that really weaponize anti-Semitism? Yeah, and we also, here's some, I guess we have some more good news thrown in here. This is a new slide, sorry, I'm just reading this. Nope, it's not a good slide, it's actually a bad slide. I thought it was good for a second. But no, this is about the San Diego Unified School District recognizing the No Place for Hate campaign and how they've you've still used it recently. This is like 2023 to 2024. So unfortunately, again, you see these articles, and initially they seem good. Like the schools are recognizing the continued stand against racism and intolerance. Like I read that and I was like, okay, great. And then you go into it and you realize that they're using ADL's framework of what this is, and there's this disappointment, right? So we should have something like liberated ethnic studies rather than something that really, gets rid of free speech.
I just want to say, it's conflation, where it turns things upside down, and so maybe it's easily misconstrued just by that way. And I feel in these times in particular, it's hard to keep our minds straight, to see what is and what isn't. And just the parallel with the use of the military again on the protest, and there's no accident that it's against people of color primarily. So I just see, regardless of ADL, this or that, but that kind of use of the military.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, in San Diego in particular, I mean, we are one of the largest military presences in the country, definitely the largest in the West Coast. For example, here's a great statistic, $60 billion of US federal monies goes to California as a state for military contracts. 36 billion of that comes right here to San Diego County, right? It's actually 1/4 of our economy is the military industrial complex here, and 1/4 approximately of the actual working individuals in our city. So yeah, and actually here's a really great question. Does anyone know the university institution that helped develop the technology for weaponized drones?
Where?
Yeah.
Close. The University of California as an institution. Yes. So really it's a great point. It's the use, we need to have this culture of consent for militarization because it's a key part of our economy. But yeah, so this slide, and yeah, we can definitely get to questions after this. These are also, we'll leave these slides up here. We're encouraging discussion after this. Yeah, we're encouraging you to use these as brainstorming opportunities to practice 1 or 2 liners that you can use with your community to dispel the misinformation that we just went over today. And think about a strategy to target the ADL. It could be an action, advocacy, social media campaign. It could even be just, if you're a parent or a grandparent or you have students in schools, maybe it could just be talking with your family and seeing if they're engaging with this type of education and what kind of narratives they might be picking up on, and just, providing contrasting and, critical history that's really needed there. So yeah, I guess that's all. We'll move on to questions, and